Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I thought I'd do something a little bit different. I normally, obviously during this segment in the day, cover fitness-related topics, but I had a subscriber ask a question that I thought was interesting, and that's what's my take on having lived in the United Kingdom, which I did for over 3 years, as a Texan. And, we can go a lot of directions with that, and I think that's an interesting topic, because it can also highlight even fitness and training in different countries because of food, gym environments, all that stuff. So let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing, work on skilling at my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. All right, and for the record, yes, I'm a native-born Texan. I've spent most of my life in Texas, but I have lived in other places in the U.S., for years. I've also been to quite a few other countries in my life, so it's not like the UK is the first country I've been to. I've been to countries on 4 different continents throughout my life, so I have been around the world a little bit. Now, that being said, some of the stuff, I'll cover some fitness stuff and cost of living a little further in. Some of the immediate differences, just cultural laws, things like that, dramatically different. And I think it would be interesting for people over there to see the difference and vice versa, because we have different freedoms in those two countries. And what I mean is that what we value as far as freedoms are very, very different there versus here. They value drugs as a freedom more over there, drugs and alcohol. In Texas, we value firearms as a freedom and self-defense. And we both take those to pretty far extremes. Like in terms of different places I've been in my life, I would say those two countries on those two separate topics are on opposite ends of the spectrum. Like they're some of the most extreme that you're going to find. Like firearms and self-defense first. Obviously in Texas, this is an open carry state. It's an open carry state. I choose not to open carry for a number of reasons, but I can. I legally can open carry. Handgun, open carry AR-15s here. There's no state laws in place in Texas preventing you from carrying an AR-15 over your shoulder. You can't carry a firearm in a threatening manner. Handguns are a little more regulated, but it's also an open and concealed carry state with certain licensing involved. But the interesting thing here, Texas recognizes other states' licenses, meaning plenty of, let's say half of people I know in Texas don't even use the Texas CHL, who still have a CHL here. Very, very loose laws by most standards in regards to firearms, firearm ownership, use, where you can carry, what you can do with them. Obviously, things like churches, a little more restricted. They changed that. Obviously, bars and things are off limits. Government buildings are off limits. And it kind of comes back to the alcohol thing in a minute. Obviously, you can't possess a firearm while you're under the influence of alcohol beyond a certain threshold. That is not allowed. Self-defense, totally different here versus over there. So again, people who aren't familiar with Texas, Texas has some of the loosest self-defense laws. Like there are things here in Texas which, if you just present to a grand jury, may not go to trial. You might not even be charged, that you could not only be charged in a lot of other places, you might go to prison for, including even the rest of the United States. Self-defense is very, very protected here. And again, I think some people would be shocked at how far, who've lived in other places, not just Europe or whatever, but even in the U.S., you're allowed pretty absolute rights to defend yourself here. And again, it's stuff I have to stay up to speed on. So you've got that, then you take the UK, obviously the other extreme. Firearms are insanely restricted. To the point to where I almost got in some trouble over there with something. It goes back to just how people don't think about stuff here. At the time that I moved to the UK, my housemate was a police officer. My roommate, he's a good friend of mine, a police officer. Now he's a SWAT guy. I lived with him. I lived with him at the time. So he was my roommate. And again, we're lifelong friends. We've been friends for like 20 years. He accidentally dropped a shotgun shell in my suitcase. I don't know. It wasn't one of mine. It was not from one of my firearms. It was one of his, from one of his duty guns. So he had a big 12-gauge shotgun shell had fallen in my suitcase. And they didn't catch it at the airport. I got it into the UK, and I didn't find it till I was unpacking my bags out of my suitcase. And I checked the law there. Had I got caught with that shotgun shell, which is nothing here. You don't need to be an adult, I don't think, to buy that here. You just walk into the store and buy those. They sell them at Walmart, right next to where you buy groceries, where I lived at the time. I could have gotten actual prison time for that. So I disposed of it, got rid of it immediately upon finding it because I knew if I got caught with that, I was in trouble. I got rid of it. It disappeared. But total accident. He didn't even think about it. I told him later, so I didn't even think about it. I guess over by your suitcase, one of them must have rolled it off the shelf and fallen into your suitcase. But they would consider that such a serious thing there, and this is a police officer here is a nonchalant. So by comparison, you understand. And again, anyone who's been to the UK, they know their gun laws are very, very, very strict. There's no private ownership of handguns. Long guns are very restricted. You can't really defend yourself in the UK. Self-defense there is even frowned upon as far as using a weapon of any type. Even a bludgeoning weapon or a bat or a hammer or something to defend yourself in your home, totally frowned upon there. Totally frowned upon. Illegal in 99% of cases. Whereas in here, you wouldn't go to trial. Someone kicked in your door in Texas and you didn't use a gun and you just used a bat or a hammer and you hit them in the head with it and they happen to die. And they're an intruder in your house and they weren't trying to escape. You probably will not do a day in jail for that. You will probably be found innocent if you're even charged at all. There, you will have to go to prison. Not necessarily prison. You'll have to defend yourself. You will have to go to trial. You will absolutely have to go to trial there. You probably wouldn't here. And you would still probably be found guilty. Of course, they don't have long jail sentences, so it's not as big of a deal. Kind of comes to another point. In Texas, we have a death penalty. Texas executes over 200 people a year. Drugs. And this matters to a lot of the fitness people. Drugs are just not restricted in the UK. People say, yeah, they are. No, they really aren't. None of you guys are getting life sentences for drugs. Trust me. Trust me. No one you have ever heard of in your country has ever gotten 20 plus years and had to do them over drugs. All right. There are quantities of drugs that people can have in the UK that you won't go to jail for that are 20 years in prison in Texas. Drugs are very restricted. It's a felony to possess anabolics without a prescription. In the UK, it's not. All right. User level amounts not only are unrestricted. At least one person I knew in the UK was caught with a bunch. Guy who went to one of my gyms, I knew him personally. Caught with a bunch of gear. He was an actual dealer. But he had his lawyer write a letter to the police stating that it was user amounts demanding his drugs back, and the police returned his drugs to him. Like that would never happen here. Any illegal quantity of drugs ever found in Texas will be confiscated. Guaranteed they will. There's no process by which you can get them back. And he had dealer amounts that because he had his lawyer declare that they were his personal use, the actual police returned his drugs to him, and he did not go to jail. So again, people who live over here are like, oh wow, that's crazy. Criminal penalties in general are much, much, much lower there for drugs. Alcohol the same way. You can be intoxicated in public in the United Kingdom. You can walk down the street drunk. And unless you're disturbing the peace, there's no actual law against the being drunk. Again, anyone from Texas is like, really? And people in the UK are like, yeah, of course. Why would anyone go to jail for being drunk? Well, because in Texas, it's illegal to be drunk in public. It's actually illegal. They will arrest you for it, and you will go to jail for it. Also, repeatedly being found drunk in public probably get your firearm examined. Kind of lose stuff like that. Again, alcohol there. You can buy it at 18. You can drink it at 18. You can be drunk in public. They have a lot more freedoms in terms of drugs and alcohol. Whereas in Texas, we have freedoms in regards to firearms, self-defense, stuff like that. Very, very different cultures, obviously. Other things has to do with population density, cost of living, and that affects gyms and food and everything else. Cost of living in Texas is insanely low. Other than a few deep metropolitan areas, deep inside them, most of Texas, honestly, houses and stuff here cost dramatically less than either other parts of the U.S. Like there are houses that I've seen, like highlighted in Los Angeles and stuff in California, that are $1 million houses that are $150,000 houses here. Like I could go buy a house that size, brand new, for $150,000. $1 million house in California. In the UK, that would be $1 million+ house or £1 million house. So if people want to understand the comparison, it's everything there is crowded, everything is smaller. Cost of property is probably per square foot 5 to 10 times higher. So in other words, working class people in Texas who own homes usually have houses on par with you would think of as the low end of the upper class in the United Kingdom, just for comparison. So, you know, they'll talk about things like, well, you guys don't get free healthcare. Yeah, but we have a lot more money. It's everything else is cheaper, and if you don't get sick, it's not really a problem. And everyone here, their companies provide health insurance. If you work for a big company, you have health insurance. So the medical care here is actually higher quality, but you're going to pay something out of pocket. But the thing that it comes down to is that this has to do with priorities. In the UK, the poor people who maybe wouldn't be able to afford medical care, they will get medical care at the expense of the taxpayer. Texas, not so much. You don't have to work in the UK. By comparison, again, if you choose not to work, and I knew people there who went to the gym, worked out, did steroids, everything else, you hadn't had a job in a year. And I'm like, how do you do that? I don't understand. And they explain that, you know, if you can't find a job, as long as you seem to be looking and you turn in 1 or 2 job applications a month, the state will pay all your bills, basically. We don't have stuff like that in Texas. That's not how it works. People with kids can get certain things. You can get unemployment in Texas. It exists, but not like to that extent. Not to where you could turn in 1 job application a month and they're going to keep paying you money for a year. It does not work that way. Totally different in terms of benefits, welfare, stuff like that. But again, the cost of living is cheaper. Food costs half the cost because we don't need to. Texas is very self-sufficient. Texas exports more food than it imports. In other words, it's one of the major food producers. Again, just due to all of our cattle, corn, farms, things like that, we're a massive exporter of food. Accordingly, food is really inexpensive. Meat, fruits, vegetables, stuff like that is very, very inexpensive in Texas. Again, and that affects protein. Because, again, they import so much food and they have a massive population density. Food is expensive. Protein's expensive. Even protein powder there is expensive. You come to Texas and the cost of meat is per gram maybe half or less for the same type of meat. For whatever it happens to be, chicken, steak, whatever. It's usually 50% or less of the cost. The cost of living, rent, houses are less. Cost of fuel is less. Cost of vehicles is less. You pay here less than half of the taxes you would pay in the UK. In other words, people living in Texas, every tax that you pay across the board, whether it's income tax, sales tax, property tax, is, in my experience, having lived in both, less than half of what you would pay in the UK. So your cost of living and taxation is dramatically less. The standard of living that you can afford in Texas, due to just cost of everything, low taxes, lower population density, is lower. However, you will have to travel for whatever you do, and there's not a lot of public transportation, so you will need to own a vehicle. In other words, if you don't drive in Texas, you're going to have problems. Life isn't going to be as easy. Cars are cheaper here, fuel is cheaper here, cost to drive is cheaper, but it's not uncommon to have no public transportation to get to your job, and many people drive an hour to get to their jobs here because we're far more spread out with lower population density. And people choose to sometimes buy houses in less population dense regions. That's really, really common. They buy cheaper houses in the suburbs so they can afford 3 times the size of the house, and then they'll commute for an hour to work. That's really, really common. And you're going to have to drive. Everything is spread out. The upside, you have far more open space, but you will need to travel to get anywhere. You will need to travel. And again, that's normal, that's common. Whereas in the UK, odds are you can walk, ride a bike, take a bus to your job for most people, day to day. Everything is packed in really, really tight. If you like lots of people, it's very, very crowded. Population density is dramatically higher. Everything is close by. You have public transportation to get anywhere. So that's a perk in certain ways. But if you like crowds, again, the UK is a much better place. If you like being spread out and not as many people, Texas is better. I personally like smaller crowds. I prefer the country, and we have a lot more open, pristine countryside here. Easily 10 to 20 times what they have in the UK. Easily 10 to 20 times. Temperature is much, much hotter in Texas. For comparison, if you like cold weather, the UK is better. If you like heat, Texas is better. Much of Texas, like where I live, in the winter time, it is sometimes hotter than the summer in the UK. It doesn't snow here. We get snow for 1 to 2 days once every 4 years. It doesn't usually stick more than a day. So it's like 24 to 48 hours of snow for the entire winter. And it's gone. And it might honestly be, as far as Celsius there in the UK, it might be back above 30 the next day after it snows. So the same week you have your blizzard here, you know, your 2 inches of snow, it could actually be summertime temperatures within a week again, as far as like UK summer temperatures. It doesn't get cold here. As far as heat goes, the heat here would kill people who are from that part of the world. If you're not used to it and you were to come here, and I've had Brits come over here, my ex was British, and she almost died in the summer. We had to walk around. She came in the summer and spent a month here. We had to basically walk around when we were outside fanning her. We got some mist bottles of sprays and fans because she had never experienced anything 40 degrees or hotter Celsius. Had never in her life, and that's what happens. That's the summer here. That's normal. You know, it can get up to 105 Fahrenheit. It's pretty common through most of Texas. So it's dramatically hotter. Dramatically hotter. So the heat is sweltering, but you also don't get cold. The UK, it's cold. You go, I think it's like dark for 6 weeks out of the year when I lived there. The sun doesn't really come out. Again, something people in Texas don't have experience with. It's much, much, much colder, much darker. You get like 2 weeks of summer in the UK, whereas in Texas you get 2 weeks of winter. So again, depends on what you prefer in terms of temperature. They're both at pretty far extremes from each other. When it comes to, again, training and everything, again, that's a big difference too. The gym cultures are different. You find in the UK, almost everyone is on steroids. When you chat with people, anabolic use is much, much higher per capita of gym goer. Not saying they don't use here, a lot do, but it's not to the same extent. So drug use is much higher. The gyms, you have less floor space. They're very, very crowded in. Interestingly enough, though, because you have so much floor space for businesses in Texas, you do see a lot of gyms that are just rows and rows of machines. The average commercial gym in Texas probably has 5 times the floor space that they do in the UK. So they don't care about making efficient use of their floor space sometimes, and some of them is just full of machines and garbage. I found in the UK it's actually easier to find a gym with more squat racks than it has been historically in Texas, unless you go to specialized gyms. Only recently are you seeing commercial gyms with 4+ racks. I found multiple gyms in the UK easily that had 4 power racks. It was actually fairly common. Again, not uncommon for big commercial gyms in Texas to only have 2. And even some of the so-called mom and pop gyms, because they're bodybuilder oriented, hard to find racks. You have a lot of floor space, but it seems like there's more old school iron type gyms in the UK, surprisingly enough, because they have to make such efficient use of floor space. They're not littered with row after row of machines. You see more squat racks, chains, bands, all that stuff are more common there. Like actual stuff for equipped type powerlifting seems to be more common than even strongman competition type training. Stuff like that is actually more common in the UK, believe it or not. I was actually surprised at that. Again, per capita in terms of different gyms that you can find. So interesting stuff there. It's just that the gyms are much, much more crowded. You have to make much more efficient use of the floor space. So again, the gym environment is actually slightly better if you're a hardcore lifter in the UK. It's actually, again, fairly easy to find hardcore gyms. Only in Texas are we seeing more of it because of functional fitness areas and more of the commercial gyms, largely due to CrossFit. But that's, again, a recent thing. That it wasn't like this a decade ago. But again, we get to the other point, though, quality of food and the cost of food is so much less here that on that end of it, high quality meats that are, again, much cheaper, readily available. They taste better because, again, we have a better environment to raise our local meat. The animals tend to be healthier here. They're not packed in as tight. A lot of your factory farmed meat that you think of in a place like Texas would actually qualify for free range laws, like in countries like the UK. The really expensive stuff there is pretty normal here. That's our normal meat. It's our normal meat here. So again, the meat tends to taste better, the animals tend to be healthier, and the food is much, much cheaper. The same thing, fruits, vegetables, dramatically cheaper in Texas. Affording a high quality diet here is cheaper. Although, again, because of so much fast food and junk food also available, because we have such an abundance of food, people still eat really bad here in spite of it. Again, why that is, I don't necessarily know. But again, a lot of it is traditional foods. There's a lot of fried foods, very similar to Scotland. They probably fry as much stuff in Texas as they do in Scotland and the UK. So again, people don't necessarily eat healthy here. But if you choose to eat healthy, it's easier, it's cheaper, and the food is more readily available for those who choose to do so. And the quality of the food tends to be much, much higher accordingly. So for people who do choose that option, the nutrition is better here, even though the training environment in the UK is actually a bit better. And I think that training environment is the reason you see a lot of very competitive powerlifters and strongmen and stuff coming out of the UK. They just have a better training environment, even if the food itself is subpar. Because in Texas, again, the only people who you see trained seriously outside of a few powerlifters are really just for football. Football, American football, is where the real weight training happens here. And so it seems to be oriented around that, not necessarily the commercial gym environment or even the other gym environment. It tends to be more bodybuilding training here, unfortunately. So again, you see a lot of machine-oriented gyms. You don't see quite as many old-school iron gyms like you do in the UK. So there you guys have it. There's kind of my difference, my take on the difference in the quality of life in the two countries. The only other thing I might add, the UK has amazing historical sites. That does lead to everything being dirtier and dingier because everything in Texas is new relatively. So the history is nice because you have 1,000-year-old buildings and churches and stuff that exist in the UK. So you get all that history and immersion, but people live at a lower technology level also, and meaning it's not uncommon for half of the people who live in the UK to live in a building or a house that we would call a historical site in Texas. So that's also kind of another perspective. We don't have 1,000-year-old buildings, and Native Americans didn't build stuff here. They were mostly nomadic. They didn't build stone structures. So, again, we consider a 100 or a 200-year-old building here to be a piece of ancient history. In the UK, half the people live like that. And half the pubs and all this stuff are actually what Texans would classify as a historical building, and they don't see it that way there. So there is also that difference, and that's the other main thing I would add. The upside, that's nice for tourism purposes. It's nice to see all the historic stuff there, but when you live in it, you do realize that you are taking a step down in terms of technology as far as the standard of living for the average person there accordingly also. Because again, most people in Texas, working and middle class people in Texas, live like the upper class in the UK. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.